Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. Simon Head and Sandhu bringing you the latest news and views with a distinctly British flavour. And I'm not going to lie, it's been a little bit of a break for us. We've been away for a week. It feels like we've been away for a month. But we're back in the saddle, and with a pack finish to 2016, we've got an awful lot to look forward to as we round out the calendar year. First off, we've got Conor McGregor going for history at Madison Square Garden at UFC 206. We'll obviously be talking about that on this week's show. We'll also talk about the latest developments surrounding the UFC, the contract dispute around GSP and his potential involvement or otherwise at UFC 206. We've obviously got UFC 207 with Ronda Rousey. We've got UFC Belfast, which also has a brand new main event which was announced this week. And of course we'll answer all your questions as we round out the show. But the first thing, Sandhu, it's been a week, as I say, and we kind of ended up sort of disappearing our separate ways in Manchester a couple of weeks ago. We pulled an all-night session, getting all the work done, and you were still recording some bits and pieces for the show while I legged it out the door to catch my train home. So we've not actually had the chance to catch up and talk about UFC 204. So first off, I mean, how's things going? And also, what were your abiding memories of that crazy week in Manchester a couple of weeks back?
Yeah, well, on a personal level, so I was battling sickness throughout fight week.
You and me both, buddy.
Yeah, you and me both. And if anyone wants to have a bit of a laugh, you can go back and perhaps watch the open workout slash kind of like fan Q&A from UFC 204 fight week. And if you can hear what sounds like a perverted old man ask a few questions, that'll be me. Because my voice was pretty much gone, and and I'm still actually battling it a little bit, so I'm gonna try and kind of get through today's show. But that aside, I also lost my phone, which was just like the most heartbreaking thing. That happened the night before fight night, which was not ideal. I have a new phone now, so thankfully I'm back in business. But putting some personal grievances aside, I thought the overall experiment by the UFC to hold a late night card, from my perspective, was a success because you had the hometown boy, you had Michael Bisping, you had the Manchester faithful really get behind him, and not just get behind him, but they really got behind all of the British fighters throughout the night, and obviously on paper perhaps North American fans and North American members of the media weren't really looking at UFC 204 thinking, oh, this is going to be a big blockbuster event, and we still don't know what the pay-per-view numbers are. But in terms of in-cage action and in terms of the performances, it's right up there. I mean, you could argue that was, performance-wise, one of the best cards of the year. We had some amazing finishes, amazing fights, and Bisping Henderson, too, is right up there for one of the fights of the year. So, but going back to the UFC's experiment, listen, if they want to do a late-night card like that once or twice a year here in Europe, they've got multiple European champions in the UFC now. Why not? Why not do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a card for the European market. I think we have to accept that it wasn't a stellar pay-per-view card that was going to bring in a load of American viewers necessarily, and I'm not convinced that it will do an enormously high number just because of that. Obviously, there was the Henderson retirement factor. We knew Henderson was going to retire. This was going to be his last fight. So the long-standing hardcore fans would definitely have wanted to get this fight and watch Hendo go out on his shield, so to speak, and just put a cap on what is one of the greatest careers in the sport of mixed martial arts. But if you're just looking at it just from a pure entertainment perspective and the fights that took place on the night, it was incredible. We had a decision in the very first fight of the night, which was, let's be honest, it was an awful fight. Leonardo Santos versus Adriano Martins. I don't even know why it was on that card, in fairness, but blimey.
It's a European fight night card in a way, Simon, so why not? What I mean?
Yeah, but that fight blew. It was terrible. So we had a decision at the start, we had a decision at the finish, which was an altogether more entertaining matchup, a much more entertaining matchup, Bisping versus Henderson. That was a thriller. But every other fight on the card, the other 9 fights, all finished inside the distance. Unbelievable stuff. And we had a run in the middle of that fight card. 5 submissions on the spin, which I believe, according to Mike Bomb, he mentioned it to us in the early hours of well, it wasn't even the early hours of the morning. It was the middle of the morning by the time we were sort of wrapping all this stuff up. He thought that was some sort of UFC record to do 5 submissions on the trot. So, we were treated to some great performances. Not all of the Brits won, but the guys who really did sort of further their cause. Mark Diakiese, great performance from him. Had a little bit of adversity to deal with early on in that fight against Lucas Sajewski. Came back superbly after a tricky start to finish him in the second round. Leon Edwards just showing the evolution of his game, beating Albert Tumanov, and I think you probably could have won a few quid on that, betting on that fight earlier in the week. Obviously Jimmy Manuwa was probably the outstanding British performer of the night in terms of spectacular, eye-catching action. The way he put away Ovince St. Preux was something very special indeed. And the Michael Bisping fight, obviously, we beat Dan Henderson. I scored the fight from Octagon side 48-47. I watched it back and I had to revise my scoring. I actually had it 49-46 watching it back. I mean, how did you see that fight? Because there are one or two people out there trying to suggest that it was controversial. Having watched it back, I don't see any controversy at all.
Well, on the night, I scored it a draw. I scored it 10-8 for Henderson in round 1. I gave it 10-9 to Henderson for round 2. And then I gave rounds 3 and 4, 5 to Bisping 10-9. I've got no problem if you scored it for Michael. I've got no problem if you scored it for Dan. And I've got no problem if you scored it a draw. I just think it's one of those cards, and it's one of those fights. That's the ideal case study to use with regards to how do you score and how do you judge a fight over 5 rounds.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any wrong answer. It's just the way you, I suppose, digest the rules of MMA, and I suppose from which angle you're looking at the action. From where we were sitting, sometimes there can be a bit of an obstruction. I haven't had the opportunity yet to actually watch the fight again, so I can't I suppose give an after the fact score. So I mean, I scored it a draw on the night, and the thing is, you've got to just in the moment give the score that you give when you first see the action on the night and stick with that, because that's what the judges have to do at the end of the day. They can't a week later say, actually, you know what, I'm going to rescind my scorecard for the night and I want to give this new one instead. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, I've got no problem with Michael winning. On the night, I think I was a little, taken back by some of the 49-46 scorecards that one or two, including our very good friend John Morgan, put up. I didn't think it would have been that skewed. But since then, a lot of other media members have come out and said they watched it a second time and they can see a 49-46 for Bisping. So listen, at the end of the day, I think for the promotion, it was good for business that Michael won the fight. I think it would have put the division in a bit of disarray had Henderson won and then kind of walked off into the sunset, and then the lineal kind of status of the championship would have gone with him with that scenario. But it was a good angle, a good storyline. I suppose for Michael Bisping, it kind of gives him some closure, and he can now move on with his career. But yeah, that's the way I scored it.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? I mean, you were talking about the experiment. Obviously, it was held in the middle of the night. I think from a crowd attendance point of view, I think it passed the test, no problem at all. Sold out 6 minutes, and those tickets were used. It wasn't like people had bought the tickets and then decided they weren't going to show up because they'd been out drinking the night, earlier in the night. We spoke to James Elliott at Octagon side, and the thing that he pointed out, and I thought it was a very sort of canny observation. He said that the people who were coming to this event were starting their night at the UFC event, which was very interesting, rather than ending their night at the UFC event. So we didn't have any fights in the stands that I saw. I set the high low at 3. I was convinced we were going to see hordes of people spilling into the arena, absolutely off their faces from a heavy night out in Manchester, and then just basically struggling to keep the pace, losing the plot a little bit, and a few tempers flaring. Didn't see any evidence of that. All seemed to be well. There was about 80% of the crowd were in for the first fight, which was incredible. And by the time we were midway through the second fight, the arena was pretty much full up. So, I thought it was a great success from a crowd point of view. But how important do you think is the pay-per-view number going to be to the the ability of the UFC to repeat this? Because there's an argument for saying that this should have been held at UK time, and there must be a number whereby they say, well, we only hit, I don't know, let's say 250,000 as some sort of ceiling, right? Or some sort of base level, rather. If it goes above that, then perhaps maybe it makes it worthwhile for them. But maybe if it drops below that, it isn't worth them putting it on as a big pay-per-view. Maybe if they'd have just held it, it could still have been called UFC 204 or whatever, but perhaps they would have held it at UK time. So I don't know. I don't know how they'll go about this. But I mean, do you think they'll look to do this again, or do you think they'll consider it to be, okay, we tried it, it kind of worked, but the pay-per-view numbers I suspect they're not going to be stellar. So what's going to be the likely scenario moving forward if Michael Bisping continues to hang on to this UFC middleweight title, and say we've got a London show in March next year, which I'm led to believe we might well see, then is that going to be a fight night? Is it going to be a pay-per-view? I mean, how likely do you think we are to see another pay-per-view over here in the next 12 months?
With Michael Bisping champion, I think there's obviously a higher chance of them bringing a pay-per-view to the UK market. I think what you've got with, as you mentioned, the London event that's kind of rumoured to be taking place in March, with the London Underground system here going 24 hours over the weekend, it means everyone from the O2 Arena can get back home at whatever hour of night they want to. There's not that problem with public transport that they had before. Now, it's such a tough one with the pay-per-view numbers because we don't know what the numbers are. Yeah. There are some good sources out there. Obviously Dave Meltzer comes to mind, who's a respected journalist with regards to reporting on pay-per-view figures. Now, he hasn't, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, come out with a number for UFC 204 yet. And it'll be interesting to see, when he does, what that number is from his perspective. But listen, if they've broken through 250 with that card, I think that's a pretty good number. I mean, there's nothing stopping them from bringing a stacked card to London, with multiple title fights, right, if they're going to promote it to the North American market, because the time zone is not going to make a difference if they're going to hold it, late at night here. And plus, with the UK pound always being a little bit stronger than the US dollar, they're always going to perhaps have the opportunity to make a little bit more money with regards to gate versus perhaps, a middle of the road arena in America outside of, say, I don't know, Las Vegas and maybe perhaps now New York. But listen, as long as you've got Michael Bisping champion, I go back to what I was saying before. Right now, you've got 3 European champions. Why not put on a European super pay-per-view where you have maybe a McGregor, a Bisping, and a Jan Jacek, for example, or maybe just a Bisping and a Jan Jacek, as main and co-main event in London. You've got the British contingent for Bisping, you've got the Polish contingent in London, and plus it's very cheap to get flights from Poland over for Jan Jacek's fans. If you beats Karolina Kowalkiewicz in New York, but because we've got Bisping as a champion, I can't see them not using him to headline that London card. They've used him for years all across the UK. They've continuously sold out in Europe. I think the Manchester card was the 6th or 7th straight sellout. So the demand is
7 in a row. It's been for them now, yeah.
7 in a row, right? And I don't think the European office want to break that streak just yet. So, and to be honest with you, I think it might even be a slap in the face to the UK fan base if they didn't bring back Michael Bisping as champion to headline that card in London next March.
Absolutely, and it's great that we're able to talk about this. We've got a British world champion, and we're in a position now where Europe as a continent is a much, much stronger entity within the sport of mixed martial arts than it was, let's say, 5 years ago. It really has picked up. And as you say, we've got Ioanni and Jacek as a world champion. We've got Conor McGregor as a world champion. And both of those are going to be in action at UFC 205 on November the 12th at Madison Square Garden. I know we're both ridiculously excited at the fact that we're going to actually get to go to this.
Yep.
It was in doubt a little bit for me after about 2-3 weeks ago, and it seems to have smoothed itself out. So it looks like the trip's going to happen now, which I'm really pleased about. It is for me the biggest, strongest card of fights I think we've ever seen. UFC 100 was obviously big. UFC 200 was big. but lost a little bit of its luster, and the fights themselves didn't really deliver. Have we got any concerns over UFC 205? Is there a possibility that this card isn't going to deliver? Because you look down the fights on this card, and every single one of them has got post-fight bonus material written all over it. So without wanting to sort of overhype this card, how good is this fight card, Sandhu? It's ridiculous.
It's the best fight card I think they've ever put together, especially when you think of the talent they've got available to them, some of the storylines and the angles coming in to some of these fights. I mean, something like Rashad Evans moving down to middleweight to fight Tim Kennedy is being completely overlooked at the moment because of the stellar main card that you've got. It's just ridiculous. We are, as we record this, about 3 weeks out. So to touch wood, there's no injuries. There's no, last minute. I don't even know what to think, but I just don't want anything to take place where any of these fights, especially the main event, drops out for any reason. I had a gut feeling. I don't know why, but at the start of the year, I had a bit of a decision to make where I had to. I mean, I can't go to every North American big card, and at the start of the year, I had to make a decision. Will I go out to Vegas, for the UFC 200 blockbuster event, or shall I hedge my bets on New York? And something was telling me, hold out for New York. It's the first time in Madison Square Garden. Growing up, I just remember watching so many pro wrestling events, and there's something special and magic about that Madison Square Garden arena and the fans that fill that arena. Whether it's just New Yorkers or international fans flying in, they create special atmospheres for people competing or wrestling or putting on concerts in that arena. And I've never been there before, so that's also going to be quite a nice moment. And I'm sure for yourself as well, Simon, to be there for the very first time. I remember speaking to MMA Fighting's Esther Lynn in Manchester, and she's done a few shows there where she's done some photography for some boxing fights, and she says that they have refurbed the arena, but the seats are very much on you. Everyone is really on top of the action. It's quite steep. So I mean, like you said, it's so hard to try not to overhype it, but it's hard not to. I mean, it's just fun. It's just brilliant, and the fact that potentially we've got on the line the very first simultaneous two-weight champion. In Conor McGregor, if he can do that, it'll be an iconic moment in not just for the UFC but in the sport. And it could just set up an even stronger 2017. It could just take the superstar level status that Conor McGregor already has, and just once again level him up. So I just absolutely cannot wait. I literally am counting down the hours and the days and the weeks until New York, and I've got the goosies, mate. I've got the goosies.
Yeah, my prep's well and truly underway. That's for sure, and it's going to come around very, very quickly now. And I'm looking down this fight card, and obviously, the fight that everybody's talking about is the main event: Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor. But we've got so many other good fights on that card, and I cannot wait to see Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. I think that is going to be an absolute thriller of a fight. I really do think that's going to be. I think that's a potential show stealer, that fight. I really do. Chris Weidman fighting on home soil against Yoel Romero. I mean, fights don't get much tougher than Yoel Romero in that middleweight division. Frankie Edgar, I think he's a little bit unlucky not to be on that main card, to be honest. But he's headlining the prelims against Jeremy Stevens. Rashad Evans at 185. I'm fascinated to see that. Khabib Nurmagomedov, the number one ranked lightweight on the planet, can't even get on the main card.
Ridiculous.
It's craziness. We've got a ridiculous amount of talent on that card. Tyron Woodley, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson for the welterweight title obviously is the other world championship fight on that card. Gastelum Cerrone looks like it'll be good. Miesha Tate, Raquel Pennington has got fight of the night potential as well. Those two women don't know how to take a backward step. So many good fights. If you were picking one fight out of that list, with the exception of the main event, if there was one that you were, you're saying, right, that's the one. I'm going to make sure as much as possible I've got everything else out the way because I want to make sure I'm watching this. What fight would it be?
Wow, you're putting me on the spot here, Si.
Oh yeah.
I think you nailed it on the head. I think it is that Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, that fight. They have fought before, but I think they're both totally different fighters in 2016. Compared to when they first fought, and they're both going to bring it. Both got Polish pride running deep in their blood. And there's a massive Polish contingent in New York, and it'll be interesting to see actually on the fight night itself. How many of the Irish bought tickets, how many of the Poles bought tickets, and what kind of atmosphere, and who will be the loudest section of the crowd. When the nationality is at stake, so to speak. But I've been a massive fan of Jędrzejczyk for a long, long time. She's one of those fighters where I was lucky enough to cover her. Before she entered the UFC, and I remember interviewing her after her Cage Warriors fight in London a couple of years ago, just before signing to the UFC, and just to see her go on leaps and bounds. She's up there as the pound for pound best fighter, female fighter in the world right now. I'd put her right up there with Chris Cyborg. If Chris Cyborg and Yana Jędrzejczyk were in the same weight class right now, I think that she'd give Cyborg a run for her money. But yeah, in terms of just pure explosive fireworks, I don't think this is the kind of fight that's going to go on the ground much. I think they're going to stand and trade for all 5 rounds if need be. I think it's got a violent end for someone all written all over it.
Yeah, it's going to be a long night for the boys and girls back home, because it's extra. I think they're putting an extra hour on the pay-per-view. Because we've got the 3 championship fights. It's hard to think that all 3 of them will go the 25-minute distance, but you need to have provision for that. So they've extended the pay-per-view window to make sure that they don't overrun, because that would be disastrous. So it's going to be a big long show, an awful lot of great fights, and for those guys out there listening, you're all probably hardcore MMA fans. This is the one to get your mates round for. Anyone who's sort of slightly interested, occasionally asks you the odd question about Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey, get them round, tell them to bring some beer with them, get them round, and get everybody in front of the TV, because almost every single fight, definitely every single fight on that main card, and that prelim card looks pretty deep as well. We've got some cracking fights on there. So many good fights, and as a showcase, for the best of the best of mixed martial arts, this is going to be something very, very special indeed. UFC 205. It took a little while. Oh, go on.
I'll tell you one thing before we move on, Simon. I hope now that WME IMG have got ownership of the UFC, and they've kind of obviously got their links, in Hollywood, I would like to see them just put a little splash of Hollywood, on this card. What I mean by that is, you can be in Madison Square Garden, you can be in the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, you can be at the O2 Arena in London. When you switch on the UFC, if you're watching from home, basically everything looks the same. It's the same style and color octagon, unless it's UFC 200. The same kind of production and color scheme and bits and pieces. Why not do something a little bit special? You don't have to go all the way to what Bellator does and have massive screens with graphics packages and fireworks going off. But it'd be nice for them to do something on the in-arena production, just to make it stand out a little bit, make it seem and look a little and feel a little special. It doesn't take much to do that. You saw what happened last summer when they had Conor McGregor and Chad Mendes with special walkouts, Sinead O'Connor singing out Conor McGregor and so forth. Something like that, maybe. Who knows, right? But yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to say is, it's a special arena. It's your debut in New York. Why not do something a little special just to kind of make it stand out from the pack of pay-per-views and what a normal UFC event looks like on TV?
Definitely. And one of the new minority owners of the UFC is a certain Sylvester Stallone. And if ever there was a guy, that you could bring in to work on some promotional packages, whether it be the Eddie Alvarez Philadelphia angle or whether it just be the Madison Square Garden big fight angle, Sly Stallone's the man, right? He's in the building now. He's part of the family now. So I think if of all these big stars that the UFC have now got, under their umbrella. He's the first phone call I'll be making. I'll be saying, Mr. Stallone, we need you. And here's, whether it be him reciting that famous speech about it's not how hard you get it's not how hard you get hit, it's how hard you can get hit and get up and all this stuff. I made a right mess of that quote, by the way. But yeah, it's get him to do that or get him to do something Rocky themed for Eddie Alvarez. There's already promotional footage of Eddie Alvarez running up those famous steps in Philly. So there's got to be there's got to be an angle there to get Sly involved.
Ben Affleck, Maria Sharapova, the Williams sisters. I mean, you've got this Hollywood star power, and I'm sure come fight night, we'll see. I'm sure in the first 5 to 10 rows, a who's who in the world of TV and sport and music and movies, because that's the hottest ticket in town. Tickets are gold dust. You can't get them. And earlier on today, I know that the UFC were issuing a first come first serve basis ticket allocation just for the weigh-ins, which is also going to be held in Madison Square Garden. So I mean, everything's going to have a big feel to it. The weigh-ins, there's going to be a press conference, and man, I just can't wait till it's fight week, Simon. I just cannot wait.
It's going to be good fun. It's going to be crazy, but it's going to be good fun.
Yeah.
That is UFC 205. We know all the fights on that card. We could run you through them all, but I'm sure you know most of them anyway. The main ones to sort of keep an eye out for, Rashad Evans, Tim Kennedy, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Michael Johnson, Frankie Edgar, Jeremy Stevens. They're all on the preliminary card. The main card, Miesha Tate, Raquel Pennington, Kelvin Gastelum, Donald Cerrone, Chris Weib and Yoel Romero. Then the 3 title fights, Ioanni and Jacek versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz, Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and of course Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor. So that fight card is set. One fight card that isn't fully set yet, we don't think, is UFC 206, which is the next big pay-per-view following that. And we'll lead into that in a second, because the whole issue of the WME IMG takeover is something it's hit the headlines in recent days, because we've seen a number of UFC employees, very unfortunately and very sadly, losing their jobs. They're being laid off, and a lot of them are people who've been in the business for years. And for a lot of people, just as it is for a lot of the journalists who work covering the sport, it's a passion project for a lot of people. It's something that, they follow it with their heart. It might not necessarily be the most stable career move to make, but they've gone for it because that's what makes them tick. It's what they enjoy doing. And sadly, it sounds like almost 10% of the workforce are either being laid off or in the process of being laid off. It's a very sad state of affairs, but when you consider that WME IMG have bought this company for $4.2 billion and they need to start working out how to get a return on investment, they must have some grand plan, and obviously this is just stage one, Sandhu.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not going to lie. Doing what we do, Simon, you do start to form bonds and relationships with certain members of not just the UFC, but we have relationships with folks at Bellator and other promotions, and you're there to do a job. But you're almost kind of collaborating and working. There is a working relationship there in effect, and to see some of the people go has been a bit of a shame. The one that kind of really kind of struck me as a bit of a shocker was actually Shonda and the entire social media team. Think about how much the UFC has done just in terms of social media, and not just growing their accounts, but creating special emojis for Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor earlier on this year. But if you just look at where they've gone social media across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, you name it, they've been on the cutting edge, on the forefront. You've had other organizations like the NFL, the NBA, and the Premier League, and other sports franchises and different sports leagues around the world look at the UFC as a leader and looking at them as an example of how best to utilize social media, for their respective sports and their respective brands. But listen, like you said, if you're WME-IMG, you've got deep roots in Hollywood and TV and video games and just entertainment in general. are you gonna really hire and keep a hold of two separate social media teams? I'm sure they've got so many social media professionals and executives who could do a cracking job, and it's just a case of them coming in and filling the roles. Now, I was able to speak to a few UFC officials in the last couple of weeks, and essentially what the WME IMG folks have been doing over the course of the last couple of months, they've been shadowing the UFC employees, especially the folks that are on site, running the events in the arenas, doing the on site and the fight week logistics. They've been shown the ropes, and they've slowly been integrated into the team. So yeah, it's gonna be weird. It'll be interesting. It's a new experience, I'm sure, Simon. In the next kind of couple of events, we're going to start to meet and greet and start to form fresh relationships with new people who may not necessarily be super big fans of MMA. We don't know yet. Yeah. They may just be coming in to do a job. They may not be as passionate, but they may be. We just don't know right now. It's the unknown. But I mean, the bottom line is it's. Even some of the top senior level executives that have been around for 15, 16 years, it's unbelievable. Britain's own Gary Cook, who done an amazing job for the UFC's office in London, helping spread the gospel of MMA and the UFC's brands, especially in Europe, who then went on to get a gig in the Vegas office and work on some of the international projects. I mean, we literally could go on and on in terms of some of the key figures that have helped the UFC really grow and expand the business in international markets. The launch of Fight Pass, Marshall Zelaznik's. There's so many things we could talk about. But I think, like you said, it's a business. The WME IMG have come in. They've bought this business. I suppose they need to cut the wage bill, or they've got people already they've employed that can do they feel a good job. But the proof will be in the pudding. I'm not gonna. We can't write off the UFC right now. I mean, at the moment, it just seems to be business as usual. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary thus far. But let's just judge how things are in 3 months, in 6 months. Whether these new employees have made any blunders, or have they improved things. We just don't know yet, and time will tell.
Absolutely. And just I know you mentioned Shanda Maloney there, who obviously did a cracking job with the UFC social side. The two names I would want to mention are Gary Cook. First off, you mentioned him.
Yeah.
He's been, as well as being, he came in from the world of football. For those guys who may be listening from overseas, Gary Cook was a relatively well-known guy from the world of football. He was the chief executive of Manchester City. Just as they'd come into a lot of money, and Gary Cook was hired from Nike to basically take them to the next level and put them on the path. And he some of the foundations that he set have helped Manchester City reach championship caliber status here in the UK as a Premier League football team. They're a Champions League team now. He's always had his reputation as being a real big hitter, but for those people who have only seen that side of him, to actually meet the guy and talk to him, you couldn't meet a nicer guy. You ask him a straight question, he'll give you a straight answer, and he always had plenty of time for me, which I always appreciated. And he did a fantastic job in the London office and went on and did very well in Vegas. And I know Dana White always sang his praises. So just wanted to have a mention for Gary, also as a fellow Brit as well. We are on the Brit Pack. The other person I wanted to mention briefly was Dave Scholler, who probably one of the more recognisable faces, who has departed of his own volition. He actually has taken what, as far as I can make out, is his dream job. With the Philadelphia 76ers. He's a proud Philly boy, and I don't think there's any suggestion that he jumped before he was being pushed or anything like that, because he was in a very, very important, pivotal position with the UFC. But he had an opportunity to go and do something amazing, take his family back home. And while he wasn't part of the layoffs, he's another person who is going to be, from a personal point of view, he's going to be really missed, because he did a great job. And again, he always had plenty of time for us British guys whenever we needed some help. So big thank you to Gary and to Dave from this end of from this side of the pond. So all change at the moment, but as you say, business as usual. It's going to be interesting to see what business changes, what different changes in focus there might be, how they're going to approach the calendar next year. Mm-hmm. Some people have talked about less events. I'm not sure I buy that, but maybe we'll talk about that a bit later. But one thing that is kind of topical at the moment Georges St-Pierre. He went on the MMA Hour last week and declared to the world that he was a free agent, which I'm not convinced that you can just do that, but he did. Right? He went on there and said, "My lawyer's torn up my contract. I'm a free agent." Right, okay. And then obviously the UFC, unsurprisingly, came back and said, "Well, that's not necessarily the case. You know, we expect him to honour his contract just as we'll honour his." So it's a tricky spot, because I think the general consensus was that the wheels were in motion and that the plan was for Georges St-Pierre to slot in as the main event for UFC 206, potentially against Robbie Lawler, I understand, right? So that was the fight I understand that they were looking to move towards. And the co-main obviously then would have been Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. When Dana White announced to Daniel Cormier on UFC Tonight, I think on the Tuesday, it might have been the Tuesday or the Wednesday, that GSP wasn't on the card or wasn't going to be on the card, you could see DC sort of recoil a bit, and it was like, oh, okay. So DC's pay packet has just fallen through the floor now because GSP isn't on that card. And it's looking like the poor relation, especially now we've got Ronda Rousey on the UFC 207 card. So you've got this huge blockbuster UFC 205. What is also going to be a blockbuster 207 card. And then you've got 206 in Toronto. And you got to feel sorry for the Canadian fans, because it always seems like those guys who get the bum end of everything at the moment. They've had a terrible run of luck with results and stuff. With events and fight pullouts and all the rest of it. Now we've got the opportunity for GSP to come back. It doesn't look like, as it stands, that he's going to come back. Is he going to come back? Do you think they could get this done? I know our buddy over in America, John Morgan, actually saw GSP in Vegas last week and TMZ'd him, basically just grabbed the camera and tried to ask a few questions and got absolutely no change out of him at all. But GSP's not that frequent a Vegas visitor as far as I'm aware, so perhaps they're talking business. Who knows? Could this deal still be done, do you think?
Well, I certainly hope so, because if they can't get the GSP deal done, man, not only do I feel sorry for Daniel Cormier, who's just going to get the bum deal out of this. I mean, like you said, to be sandwiched in between 205 and the return of Ronda Rousey at 207, that card is just going to get buried. And to be honest with you, without me having to now just Google UFC 206, from the top of my head, I couldn't even tell you one other fight on that card aside from the main event of Cormier versus Johnson. That card has got zero star power aside from that current main event. And initially I thought, when the talks were that GSP was going to make a comeback, okay, so he's entered the USADA testing pool and they were about to get a deal done, and there were talks about, Robbie Lawler, or there was, rumors about the Anderson Silva super fight, which, for me is a couple of years past its sell-by date, but, hey-ho, that's still, a pretty good fight to put on in 2016, considering how long GSP's been out for. There was even potential talks of Michael Bisping, I haven't seen his face lately, but I'm sure he's still recovering from, the brutal war he went through with Dan Henderson. But I'm sure, he'd have no problem throwing his, hat into the ring and getting in there with GSP for a big payday for himself as well. And so I thought, okay, well, there's plenty of options there for GSP. It's just a matter of getting the deal done. And they haven't been able to get the deal done, which is very, very surprising, going back to the whole WME, IMG, they bought this business. They want to start to turn a profit. And I initially thought, well, okay, they've got McGregor and this whole New York blockbuster in 205. They've got the return of Ronda Rousey at 207. You throw GSP's return at 206, you could have the best three pay-per-view streak, a three-peat or back-to-back-to-back pay-per-views ever in UFC history. There's literally no reason why a hardcore UFC fan or a hardcore MMA fan wouldn't want to shell out the money to buy each of those pay-per-views. But right now, as things currently stand, if you're thinking, right, I've got these next couple of UFC events, and can I miss one? If I can, which one is it? It's a no-brainer. 206 is the one you probably want to miss out on, because Ronda Rousey's return, that's amazing. That's huge. And obviously New York's, everything, it says it for itself. You've got to buy that one. That goes without saying. But I'm really, really surprised. The clock is ticking, Simon. If they're going to get this done, they need to get it done quickly. I know tickets are on sale or about to go on sale, and they're pretty much in line with Las Vegas prices from what I'm hearing. So without a GSP, I don't know what kind of draw you're going to have for ticket sales. And earlier on today, I read a report and I've seen some things online about there being a social media crusade to kind of free GSP and to not go to UFC 206. There's an actual kind of
a boycott, isn't it? Yeah,
a boycott. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Which is, I mean, Canadian market was once called the Mecca of MMA by President Dana White, and look at it now. It's a shell of its former self. And you put GSP on that card. Forget the Rogers Arena. You want to go to the Rogers Center. You want to go to the Sky Dome, the Rogers Arena. It's the Air Canada Center that it's currently in right now. But you want to go to the Rogers Arena. You can sell that out, 50,000, 60,000, no problem with GSP on there. That's huge. The return of GSP is massive. But without him, it becomes a card that you could potentially miss.
Yeah. I've got the fight card in front of me here. So we know we've got DC Anthony Johnson is the main event as it stands. We assume it will be the main event. Zach Makovsky versus John Moraga at flyweight. John Makdessi versus Lando Venata at lightweight. Olivier Aubin-Mercier versus Drew Dober at lightweight. Rustam Habilov versus Jason Sago. So we're getting the Canadian guys on the card. Valerie Letourneau versus Poliana Botelho, who I assume is a debutant. I don't recognise her. Nikita Krylov versus Misha Serkinov. The other big fight on the card for me is Cub Swanson versus Doo-Ho Choi, which is a fight I'm very excited about.
And is that on Fight Pass, if I'm not mistaken?
They haven't actually set the fight card officially yet, but okay. I don't know if they've named that particular fight as the Fight Pass. As the Fight Pass featured bout or not. But the way things are going, that's the co-main event in terms of quality. And Chad Laprise versus Li Jingliang. And there's another bout. Jordan Meehan is going to be making his return to the UFC against Emil Weber Meek of Norway, I believe. That's your fight card. That's a fight night card with a.
That's a fight night card. So
it's a fight night card with a world title fight at the top.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're looking at here. But as you say, you put GSP on the top of that card, and you all of a sudden, boom, you've got yourself a little bit of star power. Not that Daniel Cormier and Anthony Johnson aren't stars, because they are.
But they're not going to do 800, 900,000, a million pay-per-view buys, are they?
Correct. And that's the thing. I think there are 9 or 10 fights confirmed. So normally these fight cards have 12, sometimes 13 fights on them. So there's a couple of slots there for them to put 2 or 3 decent level fights in there, just to beef up that main card a little bit. Whether they go below Cormier Johnson or whether there's one they can stick above it. There is a little bit of breathing room for the UFC to stick another 2 or 3 fights in there just to make it that little bit more appealing. That goes down on December the 10th at the Air Canada Centre. And anyone on this side of the pond thinking of making a trip, apparently it's cheap as chips to get over there. Talking to a couple of our friends in the media who are making the trip, and they're telling me that it costs a mere fraction of what it would cost you to go to Vegas, or even to go to New York. So if you do want to go and see a transatlantic UFC card and you're not obsessed with watching a Conor McGregor fight, you can get over and watch UFC 206 pretty cheap from what I can make out in terms of travel and accommodation, at least. So one to bear in mind if you are thinking of making a trip. That is UFC 206. Now let's talk about UFC 207. We'll talk about Belfast in a minute, but let's talk about UFC 207 because obviously Ronda Rousey is the big story. The fact that she's officially coming back. She's coming back against Amanda Nunes for the title. We'll talk about some of the other fights on the card in a minute. But first off, I take it it's a given that we're happy that Ronda Rousey is coming back. Is this the fight you would have put her in? Or would you have given her Holly Holm? Or would you have given her Miesha Tate? Or would you have put her in with someone like Juliana Pena? Is she making the right move going straight in at World Championship level against Amanda Nunes, who has proved to be something of a killer as in that women's bantamweight division?
That's an interesting question. I suppose in regards to her ability, only Ronda and her coaching staff know where she's at right now, capability-wise and ability-wise. Has she been working on a lot of stuff this year? Who knows? I think the few glimpses that we've seen, on social media or via TMZ have just basically been her walking with a Starbucks frappuccino, or whatever, in her hoodie and gym jams, in Hollywood. Haven't seen too many images and video footage of her working out in the gym or anything. That's only kind of started to surface in the last couple of weeks since the fight was announced. So who knows? We'll see. I mean, I still go back to the fact that, look, on her night, Ronda Rousey, even if she's a one-trick pony and she can take you down with a judo throw and get the armbar on you, there's not many women in the world that can get out of that situation. Now Amanda Nunes, she's got the pedigree and the capability to handle herself against Ronda Rousey, and I suppose in a way it was maybe a blessing in disguise for Amanda that she was put into the main event slot with Miesha Tate at UFC 200 to get a taste of what it feels like to be on a super, super big stage, where the world is watching. So I don't think she'll have too many jitters or octagon nerves going into a massive, blockbuster event being the Ronda Rousey return. So I think that gets put to the side, and she's obviously going to get better and better herself as well. Being the promotion, yes, I think it's the right move. Put Ronda Rousey back in a title fight. If she wins, you're able to once again promote Ronda Rousey as a UFC champion. That does wonders in terms of media exposure. The media outlets don't want to cover you. It is a bit of a roll of the dice, though. If Ronda Rousey isn't able to win, that'll be 2 losses back-to-back. And if she does lose, we'll have to wait and see what kind of fashion she loses in to determine how then she's perhaps perceived. Was it just a run of luck in terms of the opponent she faced, and now that she started to face the upper echelon of women's fighters like the Holly Holmes and Amanda Nunes, maybe she can't handle it. Only time will tell. We'll find out on December 30th. The one interesting note that I want to make here is that this fight card is taking place on a Friday. Now, the last time, I suppose, if I'm not mistaken, that a UFC held an event during that New Year's period, which dropped on a Friday, was the Brock Lesnar Alistair Overeem card. And I think that did pretty well because that was a fight people were looking forward to for quite some time. Now, there's only a few people I think that can headline a UFC pay-per-view that takes place on a Friday. And I think Ronda Rousey is one of them. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think if the rumors are to be true, and I think the fight's going to be announced very, very shortly, I think we're going to get Dominic Cruz versus Cody Garbrandt as the it's not official yet, but what we're led to believe that'll be the co-main event, and that's a fantastic fight. So yeah, going back to Ronda Rousey though, it's great to have her back, Simon. For those of us in the media, she gets the clicks and she generates traffic like nobody would believe. It's literally her and Conor McGregor as 1A and 1B right up there. So for us, it's great that she's back, and we'll have plenty of news stories to post in the coming weeks and months leading up to that fight.
Absolutely, I do wonder. I think it's a big gamble chucking her in against Amanda Nunes. I think because what happens if she loses? The big and it's a question that needs asking. What happens if she loses? Because she lost to Holly Holm and she disappeared for a year. It'll be 13 months when she actually gets back in there to face Amanda Nunes at 207. So what's going to happen this time if she gets beat? Because Amanda Nunes can bang as well. The difference between Amanda Nunes and Holly Holm is Amanda Nunes has got a ground game.
Yeah.
Amanda Nunes is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. So not only is she dangerous with her hands and her feet standing, she's very dangerous on the mat. So it's for me, it's possibly the worst possible matchup for Ronda Rousey to come back. But you look at you think, okay, if she fights Holly Holm, could it happen again? Could she fight Miesha Tate for a third time? That would have been a sellable comeback fight, and perhaps one that maybe would have been a little easier. But I think Miesha Tate has evolved significantly since her last fight with Ronda Rousey, so that's not a given either. And you take that 1 year layoff into consideration as well. There's a lot of question marks over this fight and what might happen if Ronda Rousey loses. It's a brave move. I think, the UFC have always gone in the business of betting on themselves and betting on good things to happen. And the best thing for the UFC would be obviously for Ronda Rousey to win. I know that's not what Amanda Nunes wants to hear, but for business, without a doubt, if Ronda Rousey wins that fight, then things really do kick up a gear. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. I think Ronda Rousey is going to. If Ronda Rousey wins, then it's the sports story of the year. I think for her to come back after a year out and beat someone as dangerous as Amanda Nunes, the only pity is Amanda Nunes hasn't got that household name about her yet. If it had been Holly Holm, people would have known her for being the woman who beat Ronda Rousey. If it had been Miesha Tate, it would have been Ronda Rousey's old rival of years standing. But this is Amanda Nunes. Granted, she won the main event of UFC 200, but you ask a lot of people who the main event at UFC 200 was, they probably won't tell you Amanda Nunes and Miesha Tate, but it was.
No.
So she hasn't quite got that household name status. She beats Ronda Rousey, you can guarantee it will certainly improve. So really, really fascinating contest for a whole load of different reasons. Other fights confirmed for that fight card on December the 30th. Great heavyweight contest between former world champions Fabricio Verdum and Cain Velasquez. Winner of that will almost certainly get the next shot at the heavyweight champion of the world, Stipe Miocic. Mike Pyle, Quicksand, the man with the mullet, taking on Alex Garcia at welterweight. Tim Means is back in business. He's against Alex Oliveira. Johnny Hendricks takes on Neil Magny. That's a good fight at 170 pounds. Tarek Safadine takes on Matt Brown. That's a decent fight at 170
That's a really good fight.
pounds as well.
Yeah.
Antonio Carlos Jr. takes on Marvin Vettori, the Italian, former Venator, if I'm right, submission specialist. He submitted a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in his last outing for the UFC. He started well. He's against Antonio Carlos Jr. in a middleweight contest. And also announced is Brandon Thatch versus Sabah Hamasi at welterweight. So you've got, if you like welterweight fights, in UFC 207 is shaping up quite nice because you've got 5 of them announced already. So that fight card's coming together quite nicely. That's December the 30th, as you say, Sandhu. That's a Friday night. So that's just before everyone goes out and gets hammered for New Year's. So, I'd much rather stay in and watch that than go out and get hammered for New Year's. I'm too old for that stuff now. But, and that's at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. That is UFC 207. It feels like we're just talking about events here, Sandhu, but we've got so much coming up between now and the end of the year.
Yeah.
It's a really stacked end to the year, and obviously with the change of ownership and everything that's going, loads going on. But it's not all overseas, is it? We've got UFC Fight Night in Belfast coming up as well. And it was going to be Dong Hyun Kim versus Gunnar Nelson in the main event, but just this week we've discovered we've got a new main event.
Absolutely, and it's Gegard Mousasi versus Uriah Hall, and it's very interesting the way this week panned out because, as you know, Si, you were there, I was there. The UFC London office flew in Gegard Mousasi for a special media day, and they don't do that often, to be honest, where they just fly in someone from Europe or from wherever for a special media day for UK-based outlets. So that was a nice little treat, and it was great to get some access to Gegard and get some time with him. And you were there, I was there, some of our friends in the British media were there as well, and we basically all were asking similar questions in regards to who he wants to fight next. And time again in all of his interviews, he was like, listen, there's a bit of a logjam in the middleweight division. There's 4 guys ahead of him. We know who those 4 guys are. Whitaker and Brunson are tied up, and the Uriah Hall fight kind of makes sense because he wants that revenge. He doesn't feel like Hall was able to beat him the first time around, and he calls it a bit of a fluke. But Hall is ranked at number 9 right now, but he did want that fight, and then lo and behold, a couple of days later and late Friday night, the old switcheroo happens. Gunnar Nelson gets injured. It's an undisclosed injury, so we don't know quite what's happened to him just yet. Dong Hyun Kim, from what I understand, will get rebooked for another fight card in the coming weeks and months, so he'll be taken care of, I'm sure. But if I'm being completely honest, this might have been a blessing in disguise for UFC Fight Night Belfast, especially from a media perspective, because I think we were all kind of like wondering, well, are we really going to get anything super hot quotable from Gunnar Nelson and Dong Hyun Kim during fight week? Whereas now you've got a fantastic story, a nice little angle here with Gegard Mousasi, who's a bloody media darling in 2016.
All of a sudden,
he was spitting hot fire. You got this great revenge rematch angle with Uriah Hall, who beat him the first time over. And the funny thing is according to the latest odds, from what I understand, I'm not someone that bets a lot, but Gegard Mousasi is going into the rematch with Uriah Hall the favourite, which is interesting, where Uriah Hall beat him quite handily the first time around. So I think it's great, for all, for everyone concerned, it's great. It's great for the UFC that they've got this fight instead of the original. It's a shame, of course, that Nelson's injured. You don't want to see fighters get injured and fall out of opportunities like that, get out of paydays. But for our perspective, I think it just kind of lit a fire under me. I'm really looking forward to this fight. I'm really looking forward to being at Belfast now.
It's going to be good fun. And people look at fight cards and some of them complain, it's not much star power on this, or there's loads on this, and all the rest of it. There are different levels of fight card in the UFC, and the fight night cards that happen, particularly the ones that happen over here in Europe, are more tailored towards a European market. They don't have that top to bottom amount of star power. We're not going to see a UFC 205 type fight card on this side of the pond anytime soon. So the thing is to look for good, fun fights with fighters who turn up and deliver the goods. This fight card has got a whole batch of them. We've got Mousasi versus Hall, which for me is a much better main event. I completely agree with you. Much better main event. The co-main event is Ross Pearson versus James Krause. And both of those guys love nothing better than to stand and throw down. I'm looking forward to that fight. Stylistically, I think that'll be a cracker. We've got Timothy Johnson versus Alexander Volkov, which I'm slightly bewildered as to why that's a main card fight, especially as Ian McCall versus Neil Seery isn't. I'll talk about that in a second. Artem Lubov versus Teruto Ishihara is also going to be on that main card. Now,
I love the fact that Ishihara is on this fight card. I've never interviewed him before. I'm looking forward to just being around him during fight week, because he, alongside Derek Lewis, have been the kings of social media for me in 2016.
Yeah, he's been told not to talk about his bitches anymore. So I think he's had the kibosh put on him. No more bitch talk. So I'm sure he'll be coming out with some other craziness during fight week. And he's in there with Artem, who's obviously a bit of a staple of these European cards these days. Ian McCall versus Neil Seery, as it stands at the moment, that is the featured preliminary bout. That's top of the preliminary card as I'm looking at it right now. Ian McCall is one of the best flyweights in the world. He just hasn't been that active because he's had a whole load of terrible injuries. And then you got Neil Seery, who is one of the most exciting flyweights in the world. Never seen a man in a bad fight. Why the hell aren't these two on the main card? It's Neil Seery's retirement fight as well. And it might even turn out to be Ian McCall's retirement fight yet. We don't know. Because he's been through the mill the last few years, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he might decide to call it a day. So, but given that it's Seery's retirement fight, the action that he's put on, he came into the UFC really late. He took on Brad Pickett in a very short notice contest in London, and put on an absolute barn burner with Brad. He lost it, but he didn't do himself any harm at all. And he's gone on and performed superbly, even in the fights he's lost. And it seems a little harsh that he's not been given that main card slot. I mean, you could even argue this should be a co-main event fight. I mean, what do you think?
100%. I'm just bewildered by it, Simon. Like you said, it's just... I mean, I'm sure the fact that it's the first time the UFC are going to Belfast... Well, is it the first time, or have they been to Belfast before?
They have, but it's a long time ago.
It's been a while, right?
Yeah.
I think the crowd will be fantastic, and I'm sure there'll be early doors. They'll get in there nice and early. But just in case they're not, I mean, if you're a Fight Pass fighter, or if you're fighting on the Fight Pass portion of the card, what if it's like, half empty and this is your last fight? It's just weird, And I think Neil Seery's earned, with his performances in the octagon, give him a slot on the main card. Let him go out, where it's nice, full arena. You've got all the bells and whistles just before, the main card kicks off. And I saw a few articles. I think Flow Combat. I think Pete C. Carroll.
Yeah.
I retweeted his article earlier on today. Had a piece about that, and yeah, I mean, I think the UFC still has time to kind of change the bout order. They're well within their rights to do that. And I hope that some of this talk that has gone on today, you, me talking about it, other members of the media talking about it, I hope they do the right thing here and put McCall and Siri on the main card. I just don't see why they wouldn't. I know that Fight Pass, of course, is very important to them to get new subscribers and so forth, but just do the right thing. Put Siri on the main card. He deserves to go out in front of a full, raucous crowd, and I'm sure him and Ian McCall are going to put on a hell of a performance. So yeah, I'll be surprised, shocked, and a little saddened if come fight night he's like the opening act or he's in the first 2 or 3 fights of the night.
Yeah, as I say, it looks like the way it's listed right now that he'll be the featured prelim, which means he'll be the last fight on the preliminary card before they go to the main card. But all due respect to Timothy Johnson and Alexander Volkov, who I'm sure will be over the moon to be put on the main card of a UFC event, I don't think they deserve to be there ahead of Ian McCall and Neil Siri. Just look at the body of work of the men involved. Look at the status of the two guys. Siri in Europe, and particularly on this side of the like here in the UK and Ireland, he deserves that. And he's never let the UFC down. He's always gone in there, put his life on the line, so to speak, and fought with his heart every single time. I say get them on there. If anyone from the UFC happens to be listening to this, then do the man a solid and stick him on that on that main card. I think he deserves it. Other fighters on that card worth mentioning. On the preliminaries, you've got Sweden's Magnus Cedenblad. He's taking on Jack Marshman, who I think is a great story. He's the first Welshman to fight in the UFC, or he will be when he steps into the octagon on November. Was it November the 19th, is it? November the 19th, yeah. I believe so, yeah. At the SSE Arena. Marshman is, I believe, still an active serviceman. I believe he's in the paratroop unit. And he's a former BAMMA. He's the first ever BAMMA Lonsdale middleweight champion, I think that's right. And when they first introduced the Lonsdale Championships, he had the BAMMA World titles, and Tom Kong Watson had that belt. They then created this second level, which they were called the Lonsdale British Championship. They've since opened that up to allow non-Brits to compete for it as well. And Jack was the first guy to win. And I was at the fight that he actually won that belt against a guy called Carl Noon. And it was an absolute slobber knocker, as good old Jim Ross would have called it. He's as tough as nails, Jack Marshman, and it's a really interesting story. As I say, paratrooper turned mixed martial artist, former army boxing champion. He's as tough as they come, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how he gets on. Last fought for Cage Warriors, he's now stepping up to compete in the UFC. Kyoji Horiguchi versus Ali Bagatinov. I mean, you could argue that should be on the main card as well. That's a top level flyweight contest right there. Kevin Lee versus Magomed Mustafayev. That's a good fight. Anna Elmos is dropping down from bantamweight to strawweight for the first time. If you check out her Instagram, she's done like before and after pictures.
I posted it yesterday on Twitter, and it got a hell of a lot of likes and retweets.
I'll bet. She's looking in good nick as a strawweight, and she's taking on Amanda Cooper, who impressed a lot of people during her run on The Ultimate Fighter. She couldn't quite get it done in the final. She got submitted, I think, by Tatiana Suarez. But Amanda Cooper is certainly one to watch out for. I think that'll be a good fight. Justin Ledet versus Mark Godbeer, another British debutant. Former BAMMA heavyweight champion, Mark the Hand of Godbeer.
Who was supposed to actually fight for Bellator's London show earlier this year in July.
Yes.
For a bit of a backstory. But there was some dispute with regards to the contract, the positioning on the card. Ultimately, they had a bit of a falling out, and lo and behold, here he is. He's now making his UFC debut in a couple of weeks' time. It's crazy.
It's amazing how these things go around. And I was at the BAMMA event where he won the BAMMA heavyweight championship, and he came backstage. I was working backstage at that event, and you have never seen a prouder man in your life, honestly. He was grinning like a Cheshire cat. He was so happy. I can only imagine his reaction when he got called up to the UFC. Really nice guy, Mark Godbeer. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he gets on. a heavyweight as well. So if he can string a win or two together, then people will start to get excited about him. You know, he's a big, strong guy. He's got heavy hands as well, and he's been around a bit. He's seasoned. So interesting to see how he fares at UFC level against Justin Ledet on the prelims there in Belfast. Zach Cummings, who's fought a few times in Europe before, nice guy, welterweight, former Ultimate Fighter graduate, against Alexander Yakovlev. And Marion Renault versus Milana Dudieva is a women's bantamweight bout, also on that card. That is at the SSE Arena in Belfast, Saturday, November the 19th, in Belfast, Northern Ireland. We will both be there for that one. Is that right? You doing that one?
I'm there for New York, and then straight from New York, got a couple of days back in London, and then it'll be in Belfast. And that basically rounds out the year in terms of being at events. And I suppose, depending on how things work out, Simon, we'll obviously be on site together in New York, and we'll record an episode of the show there. But in Belfast, we should both be cage side, and it might be an idea to try and recreate some of the magic that we did in Manchester. For those of you who kind of gave us a positive feedback regarding the on fight night in cage press row kind of audio that me and Simon were recording throughout the night. First of all, appreciate it, and who knows, we may be able to do it again in Belfast.
Absolutely, and I can't remember who it was who tweeted this and said that all future episodes of the show need to be conducted with like high octane dance music in the background. I don't know whether everyone would agree with that, but I have to say it was a whole load of fun doing that, and
it was
giving some live reaction to stuff as we go. So if the opportunity presents itself for us to do that in Belfast, then you better believe we'll be doing that again. So I will be talking to our friends in the UFC press office a little bit nearer the time to see if we can sort of wangle some appropriate seating arrangements. So
I'm sure we can make it happen. You can pull a few strings, I can pull a few strings. We'll make it happen.
Fingers crossed, mate. Fingers crossed. It's going to be a lively end to the year. So 205, we're both going to be there. Belfast, we'll both be there. I think I've got like a 1 day turnaround to get some washing done, and then I'm over to Belfast. Anybody who's going to be over in Belfast, in particular for the event, hit us up on Twitter. Let us know.
Yes.
Let us know where's good to go, because I've never been to Belfast before. So let us know. Hit us up at the Brit Pack, at Simon Head, at Sandhu MMA, and let us know where us media types should be going. Granted, we'll be going to a Nando's at some point.
I was about to say, I'm sure there's a Nando's there somewhere.
Other than that, any advice, recommendations will be much appreciated. It's been quite a busy show. It feels like we've just been talking about events this week, but that's just kind of how it's been, lining things up for the rest of the year. But we always like to finish off with a Q&A.
Yep.
And Sandhu, you put the call out for questions again. What have we got this week?
Well, thanks again for everyone hitting us up. And like we always say, don't feel the need to wait for us to kind of prompt you to ask us questions the day before or the day of us recording the show. Throughout the week, if you've got a question that pops and comes to mind, throw it at us, tag us on Twitter using the Twitter handles that Simon mentioned before. The most important one to copy in is the Brit Pack MMA that comes up on our Brit Pack MMA Twitter feed, and that's the one that we look at when we're looking at questions. So thank you for everyone sending questions in, and cracking on straight away. Jordan Griffin tweets in and says, with Stipe in Cleveland, Bisping in Manchester, who do you think is the next champion to get a hometown show? Simon, you can go for that one first.
I'm going to call it a little early because it won't happen until next year, but it'll be Joanna and Jacek in Poland. I think whoever wins that fight in Poland, because we know we're going to get a Polish winner one way or the other. That's not much of a... it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that out. So they could already be planning that show. So maybe a show in sort of April time. They held a show in Krakow in April last year. That was actually the first show that I covered in my current job. So that was my first overseas trip covering the UFC, which was a nice one. Interviewing Mirko Krokop and people like that. It was great fun. But Poland was great to go visit. I think it is an MMA mad country, and they've got a world champion in Joanna and Jacek. whether she holds onto her belt or whether Carolina goes in there and takes the belt off her. However that goes, they should put the next fight in that strawweight division in Poland. And if the fight goes close, who knows? It could even be a rematch. And imagine that, Jędrzejczyk versus Kowalkiewicz 2 in Poland, whether it's in Krakow, whether it's somewhere else, whether it's in Lodz or somewhere else in Poland. But Krakow's got the Tauron Arena, which I think is about 16,500 capacity. Big modern arena. That's where we were last year. Absolutely no reason why they couldn't go back there, particularly with a Polish world champion. So that would be the one I would pick out. What about you?
Mate, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I was
Stole your answer.
Well. Yeah, absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It just shows that we're both on the same page. You mentioned how MMA mad Poland is, and KSW, they sell out shows consistently, have been doing so for years. And like we spoke about earlier on in the show, Jędrzejczyk and Karolina Kowalkiewicz, they've got this history that takes them back to their time, coming up through the ranks in Poland. If it's a close fight or if Kowalkiewicz wins, a rematch in Poland would go down a storm, and I'm sure it'll sell out that arena very, very quickly. So moving on, now Jordan Griffin, he sent a follow-up question, and I want to get this into the mix as well. He says, now that McGregor doesn't want to fight in Nevada anymore due to the bottle throwing incident and the fine that came along with that being $150,000, which is just preposterous, is Croke Park realistic or not while he's a pay-per-view star? Now, I think he's never not going to be a pay-per-view star, number one. I mean, belt or no belt, Conor McGregor, he's a draw for life, He'll be headlining plenty of pay-per-views to come in the near future. I was thinking about this the other day, and I suppose, I don't know if it helps Croke Park get any closer, but the fact that they've been through the mill now in Manchester, did a late night card to cater for the North American time zone audience, and the UFC's European office based in London, their old production and logistics team were able to go through the mill and do something throughout fight week. Don't forget, it wasn't just fight night. It was the media opportunities and the media events, getting all that stuff sorted out for late afternoon, late evening, so that all of the fighters can adjust to the time zone. All those bits and pieces, that only helps. But at the end of the day, there are still some political loopholes to jump through in Dublin to get that late night license. I don't particularly know what the public transport situation is, and don't forget, it's chalk and cheese. You're talking about the Manchester arena that held, I think, something like 18,000 people versus Croke Park that could potentially hold anything between 80 to 100,000 people. So, a lot more people to look after, a lot more policing involved, and that's a whole other ball game in terms of a logistical nightmare to worry about that many people at, say, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. I think what the realistic thing here is if McGregor doesn't want to fight in Las Vegas anymore, I think New York is going to be his new home. And I think, why not? It's cheaper for the Irish to fly out to. There's more airports, there's more hotels, there's more options. There's obviously that massive Irish contingent already as a rock bed in the New York area. And let's face it, it's the media capital of the world, and he's right up there. Him and Ronda Rousey are two of the biggest media darlings of the UFC. So I can see him fighting in New York for many, many years to come. And the fact that now Madison Square Garden is an option, I'm sure a fighter like McGregor wants to cement his legacy further to continue to fight in an auspicious and prestigious arena like Madison Square Garden as well. Simon, what do you think about that?
The first thing I would say is, don't rule out the fact that he's not going to. I think he'll fight in Vegas again. Honestly, I think this will be smoothed over very, very quickly. I think by next summer it'll be fine, and I would fully expect him to be headlining International Fight Week at the T-Mobile Arena next year. But that aside, if we leave that to one side and just say, okay, that's what I think, I could be completely wrong. Let's assume on this side of the argument that he isn't going to fight in Nevada again. If he's going to fight on this side of the pond, the big issue isn't so much the arena; it's the weather. It's the weather. I mean, if you can guarantee good weather, then Croke Park becomes viable. But if you can't, you got 70, 80,000 people getting wet, and that's not to, and that's notwithstanding, you know, the issues with the octagon. You could put a canopy over it and all of that. That's fine, but you know, with swirling winds and all that stuff, you know, stuff can still get wet. And I think it would be too much of a risk fighting outdoors in Mexico or in the Emirates or somewhere like that, where you got guaranteed good weather. You can kind of do that. But they also don't like doing that as well, because you can't control the climate. You know, when you're in an arena, at least you can, to a greater or lesser extent, you can manage the temperature in the arena a little bit. If you're outside, you can't. If you're looking for him to fight on this side of the pond, for me, there are really only 3 viable options. One of them is to fight in Manchester. The other one is to fight in London. And the third one is to fight in Wales. Now, Wales is a bit of a sort of joker in the pack, because UFC have never been to Wales before. But if you want a big sort of football stadium sized crowd, but you need the security of having a roof so you're protected from the elements, the biggest arena in the UK for that is, I think it's called the Prosperity Stadium now, I think.
Isn't it called the Millennium Stadium anymore?
It was called the Millennium Stadium, but I think it's been...
I love that name. I can't believe they got rid of it.
Well, I think that's the official name of it. I think it's now naming rights have been sold. It's just the way stadiums are these days. So I think it's called the Prosperity. I can't even remember, but yeah, what was the Millennium Stadium? Now, there's no way McGregor would necessarily choose to fight in that stadium when there's the potential to fight in Ireland. Sure. The problem that they've got in Ireland is the only arena in Ireland that they can really guarantee, the right conditions is the 3 Arena, which is only 9,000 people. So
too small. It's too small, sorry.
It's too small in terms of getting the fans in. So the O2 holds 18,000, I think. You could do it in London. The Manchester Arena holds about 18,000. You could do it in Manchester, but it's a bit of a sort of a crap second choice. Because if you're an Irish fight fan and McGregor's going to fight on this side of the pond, you want him fighting in Ireland. Of course you do.
Of course.
It's like when Michael Bisping fought up in Scotland. I mean, okay, it's all right to go up to Scotland and watch him in Glasgow. That is a fantastic arena, by the way, but it's not big enough. As an Englishman, you want your star, your world champion, fighting on home soil. That's why Bisping in Manchester works so well. So it's a tricky thing. I don't think we'll see McGregor fighting in Croke Park. I'd love to see it, but for that to happen, they've got to jump through a load of hoops, which is all doable. But the big X factor is the weather. So it would have to be a summer card. It would have to be like mid-July or something, and it would have to not clash with any of the GAA games, where it's hurling, football, and plus all the rugby and stuff that goes on. So
concerts,
everything.
Yeah,
so you have to fit all that in. I think it's a tough one. I really do. I think if he's going to, I think, to be honest, if you said to me he's going to fight over here, in the UK and Ireland, where's the most likely place that you'll see him fight? I would say the O2 Arena, which won't make the Irish fans happy, and it's not what I would choose, but I think that's the most likely place for him to fight in Europe. Just because it's the closest option to Ireland, in an area where they've got the infrastructure and the hotels and all the rest of it, and it's a big indoor arena. I think but that's an imperfect solution. I think, as I said, he'll fight in a T-Mobile Arena International Fight Week next year. Mark my words, it's going to happen.
Well, he is teasing a big announcement, heading into this massive fight card in New York. So who knows? Maybe that big announcement is the fact that they're finally going to do it. They're finally going to hold an event in Croke Park. Well, only time will tell, and we'll see. Wait and see what happens. Stephen Murray tweets in. We've already kind of discussed this, but I appreciate the tweet and the question. Does a new main event for Belfast make sense, or is it just a fun fight? I think it makes sense from a storyline perspective, an angle. It's a rematch. There's a revenge storyline there. Masasi's been talking about Uriah Hall for a long time. Uriah Hall seems to be a kind of fighter that's a cat with 9 lives. After coming off back-to-back losses, he's there again in a main event slot in a high-profile fight. So he can thank his lucky stars that things have worked out the way they are. But I think it's, put up or shut up for Uriah Hall here, Simon. I know we were talking about Gegard Mousasi quite a bit earlier on, and maybe we can now use this as an opportunity just to talk about Uriah Hall for a bit. But following his win over Mousasi last, I think I want to say September, October, he lost against Robert Whittaker via decision. And then obviously very recently, brutal knockout loss to Derek Brunson. He hasn't kind of quite lived up to the promise of what Dana White was kind of expecting on The Ultimate Fighter and how much he was hyped up coming off of that show. But like I said, he's in another main event slot, and it is put up or shut up for Uriah Hall. What do you think?
Yeah, I think while I understand what you say about him considering himself lucky that he's getting a main event slot after losing 2 on the spin, I think also it's a little bit of him getting something he deserved, because he was supposed to fight Anderson Silva, and that fight with Anderson Silva never materialised. I think it was scheduled once. It might even have been scheduled twice. I can't remember. But he was. I saw the posters were out on like the little social media matchup posters they like to tweet out. I've seen those out there in the past. He was going to fight Anderson Silva. That for him is probably the dream fight. Would have been the perfect matchup for him. Would have been an opportunity for him to really make his name. And kick himself up an extra level while taking on probably someone who he'd consider an idol. That fight never happened. So this, I guess, is a little bit of recompense for that as well. So he's fighting Gegard Mousasi. You can bet that they probably said to Mousasi, look, we want you to step in Belfast. Who do you want? All these other guys are tied up. So even just by process of elimination, looking down the list, he said, right, he's taken. Give me Uriah Hall again. I want to get that win back. And when I asked him about Uriah Hall, when I spoke to him this past week, he almost alluded to the fact that fight might happen. And at the time, I thought nothing of it, because he said, would they make that fight? Maybe they'll make that fight. Maybe not. And I thought, well, yeah, you got bigger fish to fry, Gegard. That's not one you're going to actively chase. But he did say to me, if they offer me that fight, I'll take it. So, and then I think 2 days later they announced the fight. So clearly that may already have been in his head at that point. So I think it's a good fight for Mousasi. I think it's a great opportunity for Uriah Hall. If he repeats the trick, spinning back kick, sort of TKO finish, then he's gonna do himself no harm at all, and he's back in the conversation again. But for Gegard, he needs to really put him away in the sort of fashion that he's put away Vitor and the way he put away Thiago Moreta Santos at UFC 200. If he can do a number on Uriah Hall, he's right up there in the conversation again for sure.
And important to note that Mousasi openly has said he's only got 2 fights left on his UFC current contract at the moment. So he gets a main event win over Uriah Hall. He's in pretty good shape in going into his very last fight with the UFC to really go hard on the negotiation table in regards to title shots and more money and marketing push behind him, whatever the case may be. So yeah, a big win for Mousasi. There's a lot more on the line than just getting the next title shot. It's a new UFC contract potentially in the lineup there as well. So Graham Hughes tweets in and says, will the Korean Zombie fight before year's end? So the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung-young, he's been on military service for the last couple of years, which recently expired. He's done his duty, he's done his service to his country, done his time in the military, and he's back. And he didn't pull any punches. He went straight in for the jugular, called out one BJ Penn, who for some reason this year he's been linked with so many fights, he's been booked for so many fights, and for one reason or another fights haven't taken place. And the one that's most notable was the fight against Ricardo Lamas that was supposed to headline UFC a return to Manila in the Philippines, and subsequently that event got cancelled. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really, really feasible that the Korean Zombie could fight before years. And hey, listen, if the UFC are going to put together Korean Zombie versus BJ Penn, if that actually happens, that would be an ideal fight for a Fight Pass featured prelim on, say, the UFC 207 card. What do you think, Simon? What do you think about that idea? And again, answering the question, do you think zombie fights before the year's end?
I think what you suggested there is a great idea. The big flying ointment here, potentially, and I don't know enough about where he is within all of the machination of the UFC. He needs to go through 4 months of USADA testing, right? Because he's been out for that long.
I would believe so. Yeah, you're right.
That would immediately rule him out until like February, March time, I would assume. So, or sorry, January, February time. So, I don't know whether he's already been in the pool. I would have thought that it would have been picked up if he was in the pool already. But I assume that would be the main sort of stumbling block to him coming back as quickly as the end of this year. If he's available and he's cleared to fight, get him on that 207 card. Absolutely. I love that matchup with BJ Penn. I think that's a sellable matchup. One that is it's okay enough for BJ Penn. You know, I didn't like the Ricardo Lamas matchup for BJ Penn. I thought he would have got destroyed in that match. And I didn't think that it really would have done an awful lot for Ricardo Lamas' career either, if I'm honest. So I think Chan Sung Jung versus BJ Penn, I think is ideal. I think that's a great matchup. And who's to say that further down the line we couldn't see the Korean Zombie versus the Korean Superboy.
Oh, I'd love it.
They both fight at 145 pounds. So if the UFC want to put on a super show in South Korea, and they put on a great show in South Korea last year, go back down there with an all-Korean main event in a featherweight division. That fight would be a barn burner as well, by the way. So that's I'm already matchmaking for the Korean Zombie. He hasn't even come back yet. I love it. So I'm already looking 2 or 3 fights down the line for him. But yeah, BJ Penn would be a great fight if he's cleared to fight at 207. Get the man on the fight card. But I suspect USADA might have something to say about that. But we'll have to see. I don't know. He may already be in the testing pool. If he is, who knows? Good
shout on USADA. I always forget about that when we're talking about fighters coming off of long injuries or suspensions, retirements or whatnot. They've got to go through that 4-month testing phase before they can fight. Yeah. Right, so Joe Hale tweets in and says, where does a win at 205 for Michael Johnson leave him? So Michael Johnson's fighting Khabib Nurmagomedov. Is it a title fight? Is it the winner of RDA versus Ferguson? Is it Alvarez if he loses? That's a really good question. I'll tell you where it does put him. That's in a very, very strong position. Khabib Nurmagomedov is undefeated. He's never been beaten. If you're the first guy to get a win over Khabib Nurmagomedov, I think the world is your oyster. I think he would be well within his rights to say, I want a title shot next. Khabib Nurmagomedov was, obviously used as a pawn, essentially, in the whole Eddie Alvarez, Conor McGregor title fight negotiation, contract situation, whatever you want to call it. So he was essentially promised a title shot anyway. So to get a win over him, I think you'd steal his thunder, and I think you put yourself right in title contention. What do you think, Si?
Totally agree. I mean, given that probably won't happen, I think the winner of the RDA Tony Ferguson fight would be a good backup, because you can bet if Conor McGregor beats Eddie Alvarez, a certain Mr. Diaz might come into the picture very, very quickly. That's a fight that just will be screaming out to be made at that point. So the trouble with this 155-pound division, it's the strongest division in the UFC in my opinion. I think closely followed by the featherweight division, but the 155 division is just ridiculously stacked, and you could literally just close your eyes and pick a name out of a hat for the next championship contender, and you'd have a great matchup. So, but yeah, if you beat Khabib, you're the number one guy. No one's come close to beating him yet, and I think only injuries have prevented him from fighting for the title and maybe even holding on to that championship belt by now. So the most important thing, I think, whoever wins that fight next either takes on the winner of the RDA Ferguson fight or goes straight into a championship fight. I think, but especially if it's Khabib, if Khabib beats Michael Johnson impressively, then surely the man deserves to get the title shot. He's been number one for God knows how long. He's obviously been, he's suffered with injuries and stuff. If he comes back and looks good, I don't think you leave him on the shelf too long. You book him in a title fight as quickly as you possibly can. If Michael Johnson beats him, then he's right in the mix, definitely. Give him a title shot.
Sounds good. Final question coming in from RG, and I'll let you answer this one first, Simon, as I've been answering most of them myself first. On the rumours that WME IMG will hold less UFC cards next year, does this awful 3-week break prove that's a bad idea? You can have that one first, Si.
Right, okay. All right, this awful 3-week break was supposed to be only an awful 2-week break because we were going to have Manila, right? So we have to sort of balance it up a little bit. I'm of the view. Well, I've got two main opinions here. The first one, I'd be amazed if they cut back on the number of events, just because they need as many opportunities to produce revenue and make money as they can. So, and the number one driver of revenue, you would assume, is events. So that's a very, very basic way of thinking. But I mean, to sort of cut back on events, let's say they want to do 35 events next year as opposed to, was it 48 or 46 or something they're doing this? So
I think it's 44 this year. So.
Right, okay. So let's say they want to do 34 events next year. Let's say they want to lose 10 events off the calendar. That amount of revenue needs to be found in those other fights. So it's tricky. Maybe they can do more stacked fight cards and things like that, and maybe it works better that way. I don't know, but I just don't see that happening. I don't see them reducing the number of events. However, I wouldn't be crying about it too much if they did. I think probably the sort of optimal number, if you were looking at being able to hold a certain amount of events without it becoming too thin, or without it becoming overkill, if you could do 3 good quality shows a month, with like 2-week gaps between each, I think that would work, where it gives you enough time to give each event a run up. And we had a run last month where I think we had 5 or it might have been 6 in a row, 5 events or 6 events in a row, and then you had this situation where you almost had no run up to each event. You were literally going from one event, bang, and you're into fight week for the next one. And that's tricky sometimes. Whereas what we will see with 205, everyone's going to be building up to this. It's going to get a nice long run up, and I think it's going to really benefit from that. And I think 207 will enjoy the same thing. And I think that's the thing. I think give the events enough room to breathe before and after, and give enough of a run up without it becoming sort of tumbleweed, you know. So 3 weeks is too long a gap, but I think a week gap or 2-week gap is fine. And I think if the UFC worked on the basis of doing maybe 3 events a month over the course of a year, I think that will work quite nicely, to be honest. 36 events a year I think could work well.
I agree in regards to the number of events. I think if you had fewer UFC events, first of all, it will give the fan base a reason to start to get excited for a UFC event. I think sometimes because there's so many UFC events, you can't really digest and really absorb and soak up when a big fight just happens. You're kind of almost mentally forced to move as fast forward as possible to the next one already and start to look ahead when perhaps maybe you're not ready to look ahead. And it'll give obviously some breathing room promotionally to build up some of these cards. And if you have fewer events, maybe you can stack the deck a little bit and produce higher quality cards. The one thing I will say is the reason why I agree, I don't think that they will reduce the number of events next year, aside from the fact that obviously you've got to generate revenue, and they just bought the business for $4 billion, whatever the case was, 4.4. They've got a contract in place, Simon, with Fox Sports in America, where they have to deliver X number of shows, and that contract runs out, I think, at the end of 2018. So you've already kind of, you're committed to Fox. Now, perhaps you could pull the number of events you may want to do on UFC Fight Pass, which is their own, over-the-top online platforms. They're well within the rights to do so. I don't see them pulling back on the number of pay-per-views because that's where they get their most money. So even if you pulled back maybe 3 or 4 Fight Pass events, that's, I suppose, trimming the fat a little bit, but it's not exactly, reducing the overall schedule too much. But yeah, look, I think it would be a great idea if they did reduce the schedule. I also think if they did reduce the schedule, it would give some breathing room and some strategic maneuverability for the likes of Bellator and World Series of Fighting to perhaps move their events into certain slots in the calendar where they're not perhaps competing directly with the UFC, and that could help them get some more media coverage, some more media exposure, and get some more eyeballs on their product. Because at the moment, with the current UFC schedule, it's very, very hard for the likes of the Bellators and the World Series of Fighting and so forth to try and position their events. And even if they do, if it's on a Friday, I don't think a lot of, mainstream casual MMA fans are going to give up a Friday night and then a Saturday night to watch some MMA action. They may just skip the Friday night because they want to look forward to the quote-unquote premium brand that is the UFC, maybe catch up on the highlights, read an article, or watch a few GIFs to find out what happened on Friday night on a Bellator or a World Series of Fighting, and then just kind of like tune in or pay for the pay-per-view and watch the UFC product on a Saturday night. But yeah, listen, I think I've loved the last couple of weeks to have off, I'm not going to lie. It's been nice to kind of have a weekend not to worry about UFC coverage. And it's kind of made me, I don't know about you, Simon, but I'm really now excited for the next UFC event. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they ramp up their promotion for 205. And it kind of is weird because there hasn't been a UFC event for a few weeks now, but the UFC has been well in the news, headlines, rightly or wrongly. They keep themselves in the public zeitgeist in one way or another. But listen, when it comes to just having a weekend, if you're a European-based fan or a European-based reporter, to get a Saturday night where you don't have to stay up until 6 o'clock in the morning, I'll take that as many times as it can get it.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I did that anyway, watching MotoGP that was happening. So I've completely wasted my opportunity for rest, staying on watching people racing around on bikes from Japan. So it was Australia, but it was craziness. But yeah, I completely agree with you. And obviously, we've got the Ultimate Fighter Latin America finale taking place. That's our next live event, which will be taking place on Saturday, November the 5th, Rafael dos Anjos against Tony Ferguson, El Kukui, going head-to-head in a fascinating contest. The winner of that could legitimately argue has a good shot at being the next man in line for the UFC Lightweight Championship. That's the main event in that one down there in Mexico City. Then, obviously, all eyes will turn towards Madison Square Garden, UFC 205. Everyone will start getting very excited. Fingers crossed, touch wood. Lucky Heather, whatever other weird rabbit's foot, whatever whatever your lucky charm of choice happens to be, do what you need to do with it, and let's hope that all the boys and girls on that fight card stay fit, stay healthy, and get to Madison Square Garden in one piece, so we can really get what will hopefully be the greatest UFC event of all time on Saturday, November the 12th.
Simon, before we sign off, I did want to say one thing, and I know we've run out of questions, but yeah. I did want to say something. You have spoken to me about a fight that you've been hoping that the UFC would put together for quite some time, and I believe we've spoken about it on the show once or twice, I believe.
We have.
And I wanted to raise it on the show because I know that this is something that you've been hoping for a long time that the UFC would put together, and they've done it. Brad Pickett, Uriah Faber. It's going to happen. They've signed the battle agreements. It's official. I just wanted to kind of throw it out there, get your take on it, get your opinion, and why you wanted this fight to be put together for such a long time.
They're two of the biggest fan favourites in that weight class on their respective sides of the pond. Uriah Faber is going to go down as a legend of the sport. Brad Pickett is going to go down as one of the legendary British figures in UFC history. And they've both come through the WEC. They've both, their careers have run side by side in many ways, but they've never met inside the octagon. But here they are. They're finally, they're finally going to compete. Both of them towards the tail end of their careers, but both of them still relevant in their respective weight classes. And it's, as you said, it's a fight I've wanted to see for ages. It's a fight that to me makes, especially where they are in their respective careers, it makes sense to put this fight on, because you could stick them in there with an up and coming prospect, or someone who's sort of in the middle of the rankings but hasn't really got a big name. Why not put them against each other? It's almost like a WEC super fight, this. And I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think it's the perfect way for the pair of them. I mean, if one or both of them decided that this happened to be their last fight, and it doesn't sound like either of them will, but if they did, what a fight to go out on, And I think it's a fight that will really get each respective fighter's sort of competitive juices flowing. It's not a world championship fight, but both these guys have been up there doing the business at the highest level of the sport for the best part of a decade, if not more. And I think it's an absolute no-brainer of a matchup. I was so pleased when I saw that they made the match. In fact, someone tweeted and said, "I'm sure Simon Head will be delighted with this." And I'm like, too flipping right I am. This is a fight I've wanted to see for a few years now. So yeah, I'm dead chuffed. And it's the only disappointing thing is I'm probably not going to be there to see it live because I think it's on the Sacramento card, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
So I suspect I won't be at that one, but yeah, I've got a lot of time for both guys. Both superb people to interview and deal with from a media perspective. Both great fan favourites. Both of them have got fantastic walkout songs, although the American market probably hasn't quite got Chaz and Dave yet. I always look around at the American journalists. Whenever Chaz and Dave comes on the speakers, and I just look around at all these American journalists and I'm like, what is this? I'm like, Chaz and Dave, my man, don't diss it. And obviously you've got a bit of Tupac for Uriah Faber. It's a great matchup. That's it. We want to watch great fights. That will be a great fight.
Well said, well said. Well, I wanted to raise that because I know you've been, raising it in conversation on and off air for quite some time now, and I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up on this week's show.
You're very kind. You're very kind. That's us pretty much done, isn't it? We're pretty much
That's
done.
us.
This might be a record-setting show. I'm looking at my call recorder, and we're at 1 hour 40 minutes.
I remember when we first had ideas for the show, Simon, a few months back, and we thought we were going to try and keep it around about the hour mark, and ever since then, has crept up. We've crept up to almost 2 hours now as an average. So, but hey, listen, if you guys like the length and appreciate the length and want us to keep it at this length moving forward, let us know. If you'd rather us cut it in half, just let us know. We'll see what we can do. But it's always good to kind of catch up and shoot the shit, so to speak, and talk some MMA and catch up and talk about the hottest topics from, as we always say, the British perspective once a week.
Absolutely. And we're trying a few new things in the background, experimenting with a few bits and pieces. So keep your eyes open. You might start to see some additional content coming from the Brit Pack in the months and weeks ahead. So just a little teaser for you there. But always enjoy getting together and talking MMA. Thank you to everybody out there who is a regular listener. If you don't already, please do subscribe. You can subscribe via iTunes, you can subscribe via Stitcher, and you can also subscribe via Acast. They're your three main platforms for subscribing to the Brit Pack MMA podcast. You can listen to us on SoundCloud as well. So soundcloud.com/the Brit Pack. That's the main home for our podcast. You can get all the links to everything on that page. You can also get streaming players on there. And if you happen to run an MMA blog or an MMA website and you want to embed it, feel free. That's what it's there for. Get it, share
Help
it.
us rate it, review it, leave us a review, and who knows, we may even read it out.
There you go. And of course, you can hit us up on Twitter. Sandhu is at Sandhu MMA. I'm at Simon Head. Nearly forgot. And the show is at the Brit Pack MMA. We've almost hit the magical hour and 3/4 mark. So I think now is probably a good time as any to wrap things up. Say thank you so much for listening. We will be back next Monday. No more weeks off from here on in. And we'll speak to you next week. I would say enjoy the fights. We don't have any this weekend. Enjoy your weekend off. Spend time with your friends and your family. Have a cold beer. And get ready for the fights coming up. We've got a busy end to the year. And the Brit Pack will be with you every step of the way. Enjoy the weekend off, and we'll speak to you next Monday.